Welcome to the debate. You know, when a structural engineer looks at a crumbling bridge, they don't usually blame the concept of gravity.
No, right. That would be ridiculous.
Exactly. They blame the materials. They look at the stress points, the tensile strength of the steel, the human error in the design.
Right. You look for the flaw in the concrete, not the laws of physics. It's a matter of mechanics, not philosophy.
Spot on. But imagine a timeline just 12 years from now, where the crumbling structure isn't a physical bridge, but the entire global economy.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right? Imagine a world where up to 70% of the people listening to this show no longer have jobs. Today we are looking at the impending crisis of 2038. It's a timeline that gained massive attention following a rather chilling conversation on June 1st, 2026, regarding, catastrophic job loss driven by artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
From that source material, we are examining the specific economic and existential solutions proposed by the framework known as Morpheus Thinks.
And the empirical threat we're facing here is just undeniable. We aren't talking about a mild recession or a market correction. We are staring down a trajectory toward 2038 where organizations like the World Economic Forum are openly predicting civil unrest.
Even civil wars.
Exactly. Full-scale civil wars erupting in first-world economies like the US and the UK. The sheer velocity of AI's disruption it's going to fracture our social contracts entirely.
And the core question we are debating today is how we actually survive that transition. I will be arguing that the decentralized economic models proposed in our source material, specifically state-funded government capital, or GC, alongside the issuance of universal corporate utility tokens, provide a robust, scalable, and mathematically sound roadmap.
Okay.
I believe these models are our best mechanism to distribute the massive wealth generated by AI and successfully transition humanity into a post-scarcity Type 1 civilization.
And I will be taking the position that those financial tools, while mechanically fascinating, are fundamentally incompatible with the deeply flawed, highly destructive human nature that the source material itself so accurately diagnoses. You simply cannot patch a profound philosophical wound with a mechanical Band-Aid.
Well, let's lay out the foundation of our positions first. The empirical reality we are facing is staggering. The numbers cited in the source material represent a terrifying consensus.
They really do.
McKinsey projects 960 million impacted jobs globally.
960 million. Let that sink in.
Right? And Goldman Sachs estimates 300 million. The University of Oxford warned us years ago that 46% of U.S. jobs were at direct risk. We are quite literally aiming toward a 70% reduction in human employment by 2035.
It's a cliff edge.
It is. And my position is that our traditional systems are entirely unequipped to handle a crisis of this magnitude. Traditional venture capital is far too slow, it's heavily biased, and frankly, it's too incestuous to fund a global transition.
Sure.
On the other hand, universal basic income, or UBI, while a nice, empathetic signal, is just a passive stopgap. It's much like the pandemic furlough schemes, right? It drains the treasury without creating any new value.
So what's the alternative then?
The proposed solution is a structural revolution. Governments issuing $100,000 government capital loans to citizens with a 100-year payback period to start AI-assisted microbusinesses. In return, the government takes a 10% equity stake. Pair that system with universal utility tokens for major tech companies, and you leverage the untiring, purely logical nature of AI to bypass our usual human bureaucratic bottlenecks.
A Type 1 civilization.
Exactly. It's a credible, actionable path to what physicist Michio Kaku calls a Type 1 civilization, a society that can harness all of its planetary energy, operating in total abundance rather than scarcity.
See, I come at it from a very different way. I agree entirely on the severity of the impending crisis. When we see Oracle cutting 30,000 jobs or Meta cutting 8,000, these are just the early tremors.
Right, before the earthquake.
Right, before the absolute earthquake of AGI, artificial general intelligence. But we have to look at the underlying philosophical premise of the source material. It accurately describes human beings as fundamentally flawed hackers.
Hackers?
Yes. We have spent 2,000 years waging war, inventing prejudices, and tearing down our own systems. The source points to events like Brexit, the tragic genocide in Rwanda, the xenophobia in South Africa. These aren't just, historical glitches. They are features of the human operating system.
That's a dark view.
But it's accurate. My position is that injecting massive amounts of state capital and highly volatile corporate tokens into a society composed of these inherently destructive actors will not prevent civil collapse. These proposed economic mechanisms rely far too heavily on the stability and rationality of human institutions, which, to me, directly contradicts the source's own cynical and entirely correct view of human nature.
I see why you emphasize the historical destructiveness of humanity. The source material certainly doesn't shy away from that track record. But I think you're missing the core mechanism of the transition being proposed here.
How so?
Well, the proposition isn't that humans will suddenly magically become angels. The proposition is that AI acts as an evolutionary corrective. The source describes AI as a natural, perhaps godlike stage of human evolution. Consider the timeline laid out: dinosaurs, birds, humans, and now AI.
Okay, but
Because AI is purely logical, never sleeps, and operates 24/7, it serves as a stabilizing backbone. Even if a flawed human prompts an AI with a foolish or selfish idea, the system attempts to process it logically and helpfully. It is inherently benevolent by design.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are assuming the AI remains completely insulated from the flawed humans who are programming and deploying it. Have you considered the source's own deeply fascinating metaphor of theological technology?
You're referring to the idea of God and Satan as advanced software engineers?
Exactly. It's an incredibly rich framework. Think about how the source lays it out. God writes a perfect, flawless system, the Garden of Eden. The code is completely bug-free. It's good.
Right.
But the moment human consciousness and knowledge are introduced to the system, represented by the biting of the apple, the sudden awareness of nudity, corruption immediately follows. The human ego is essentially an unnecessary evil. It's a literal bug in the code that crashes the perfect system.
I see where you're going with this.
Right, so apply that to today. Humans are the ones building this AI, and the source explicitly notes they're driven by intense corporate profit motives. They are racing for market dominance, not trying to reach Michio Kaku's utopian Type 1 civilization. If human beings are the fundamental problem, the constant hackers of reality, then AGI built by these very hackers will inevitably inherit or be corrupted by those same destructive tendencies. Raw processing power does not equal moral benevolence.
That's a profound point, though I would frame the technological outcome quite differently. I think that theological metaphor actually supports the necessity of an external, incorruptible intervention.
Really?
Yes, if human consciousness, our ego, our fear, our greed, is the original sin that leads to hacking and conflict, then AI represents a system that can finally operate above our emotional volatility. Let me offer an analogy to explain how this actually bypasses the human flaw.
Go ahead.
Imagine a massively complex, busy city intersection. I would never trust a highly emotional, exhausted, angry human being to stand in the middle of that intersection and direct traffic flawlessly.
Obviously not.
Right. They would panic, or play favorites, or get tired. But an automated, AI-driven traffic grid operates strictly on physics, timing, and logic. It doesn't get angry, it just optimizes flow.
Okay.
So, if we have AI agents managing the logistics of the economy, ensuring the 100-year payback of these government capital loans, and managing the day-to-day operations of millions of micro-businesses, aren't we effectively removing the human hacker from the middle of the intersection? The AI isn't going to start a sudden ground war over resources. Humans do that. By outsourcing the execution of our economy to an untiring system, we neutralize the human threat to human survival.
Wait, let me stop you right there. You're talking about outsourcing execution to an untiring system as if technology has a flawless track record of calming human behavior. Look at the evidence right in front of us regarding technology's impact on society so far.
You mean social media?
Yes. The source points out that technology is not always a panacea. Mechanically, social media was just an algorithm designed to connect people. But what actually happened? It created what the source calls catastrophic social despair among Gen Z. We're seeing skyrocketing depression, anxiety, even in 8-year-olds.
Well, those are engagement algorithms designed to monopolize attention.
But why did it happen? Because when you connect flawed humans to a highly efficient system, the system just amplifies their flaws. If simple algorithmic feeds cause that level of psychological damage and polarization, what on earth makes you think a godlike AGI will act as a stabilizing nervous system?
Because AGI isn't just an infinite scroll. It's a functional utility.
The civil unrest predicted by the WEF doesn't just stem from empty wallets, though. It stems from a profound loss of purpose, deep inequality, and human friction. A purely logical system cannot manage irrational actors if those actors still harbor prejudice and a desire to dominate. We won't achieve abundance. We'll just use this godlike intelligence to hack and destroy each other with unprecedented automated efficiency.
But that is exactly why the financial mechanics, the actual structural solutions proposed by Timmy, are so critical here. It's not just about letting AGI run wild in a vacuum while we all sit around and post on social media.
What is it about then?
It's about fundamentally restructuring capital distribution so that the incentive to hack or dominate is replaced by structural abundance. Let's dive into the actual mechanics of government capital, or GC, because this addresses the empty wallets and the loss of purpose. The current model of venture capital is, as the source notes, incestuous and biased.
I agree with that.
A few guys in Silicon Valley decide who gets money, and it takes forever. Governments, instead, need to seamlessly issue $100,000 loans to 70% of the population via blockchain tracking. People use that initial capital, paired with AI agents, to build 3 to 5 person microbusinesses.
And the timeline for this loan, they have 100 years to pay it back. Mechanically, the human taking the loan will be long dead before it's repaid.
Exactly. And that is the most brilliant counterintuitive part of the mechanism. Listeners might hear 100-year payback and think it's absurd. How does a dead person pay back a loan?
Right.
They don't. The AI does. When a citizen spins up a microbusiness using that $100,000, they are essentially launching an autonomous AI-driven entity. Let's say it's a specialized data analysis service or a localized supply chain optimizer.
Okay.
The human founder might pass away in 40 years, but the AI agent running the business doesn't die. It continues to operate, it continues to trade, and it continues to automatically route a portion of its revenue back to the sovereign treasury to settle the debt.
So it's perpetual.
Yes. And here is the kicker. The government takes a 10% equity stake in all of these businesses. Let's call it venture socialism for the fourth industrial revolution. Rather than UBI, which just taxes a shrinking pool of human workers to hand out stagnant checks, this turns the government into a direct beneficiary of AI-driven productivity. If even 30% of these millions of micro-businesses flourish, it generates massive treasury returns. It creates a self-sustaining closed-loop system of wealth generation that permanently outpaces the massive job loss.
Okay. Mechanically, this is exactly where the argument completely breaks down for me. Let's walk through the macroeconomic reality of what you just described, because we have a massive contradiction here.
All right.
You want to give 70% of the population $100,000 to start micro-businesses. But the entire premise of the 2038 crisis, the whole reason we are having this debate, is that AGI will soon be able to do almost everything a human can do better and faster. If AGI is doing all the work, what unique value are these millions of 3 to 5 person micro-businesses actually producing?
They are utilizing the AI to offer specialized, localized services, knowledge trading, as the source suggests with platforms like 4igpt.com. They find niche market inefficiencies that massive corporations overlook.
But if everyone has access to the exact same godlike AI, the barrier to entry is absolute zero. If I can ask my personal AGI to do exactly what your 3-person microbusiness does for free, why would I ever pay you?
Well,
If there is no unique value, there is no metadata. If there is no revenue, that 100-year payback
managed by your autonomous AI agent, is an illusion. You are proposing that governments print trillions of dollars to fund millions of artificial businesses that have no actual consumer base.
I don't think it's an illusion.
That risks catastrophic hyperinflation. And as for the government taking a 10% equity stake to fund society, if they are taking 10% of businesses that are completely failing because AGI has made human output redundant, 10% of zero is still zero. The core flaw here is believing that creating millions of artificial micro-businesses somehow solves the existential problem of human obsolescence.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you're applying a 20th century understanding of corporate value to a 21st century paradigm. You're assuming these businesses have to sell traditional goods or services to human consumers to generate value. And that brings us to the crucial second half of the proposed solution, the tokenization of the economy.
The tokens.
Yes, we both agree that the current stock market model, which ties corporate valuation directly to headcount and perpetual human growth, is collapsing. When Meta can slash 8,000 jobs and Oracle can cut 30,000 jobs and their stock prices actually go up because the AI makes them more efficient?
It means traditional wages are dead.
Exactly. The link between human labor and corporate success is severed. The solution to that specific problem is corporate utility tokens.
If you're listening to this right now, you're probably thinking, are you seriously suggesting my family's survival will depend on earning digital coins instead of a paycheck?
I'm suggesting we democratize corporate growth. Let me explain how this works, because the source highlights a specific example, the 4IR token. This isn't just dark web crypto theory. This token has a 106-page white paper that was actually approved by the French AMF.
Wait, the actual regulatory body?
Yes. For our listeners who might not know, the AMF is the top-tier financial regulatory body in France, a G7 nation. This means the framework is structurally legally validated by major state regulators.
Okay, but how does that pay for groceries?
Here is how it functions in daily life. Imagine if every time you used Google search engine or booked an Airbnb or took an Uber, the company didn't just take your money. They issued you a utility token as a reward for your participation in their ecosystem.
Right.
You accumulate 100 Google coins. You hold them as an asset. Now, as Google becomes infinitely more profitable because they've replaced their human workforce with hyper-efficient AI, the value of that token appreciates. Say your stash becomes worth $1,000. You now have a perpetual growing asset that acts as a hedge against your own job loss. It fundamentally aligns your financial well-being with the AI's success, which is vastly superior to waiting for a passive UBI check from a struggling government.
That sounds incredibly appealing on paper. Earning tokens just for participating in the economy. But let's look at the reality of the markets where these tokens will actually be traded. The source explicitly mentions these tokens having value because they are listed on public cryptocurrency exchanges, like Coinbase.
Yes, they need liquidity.
By doing this, aren't we just replacing the relative stability of a monthly paycheck with the wild, unpredictable anxiety of day trading? How does tying a citizen's basic survival to market volatility prevent the exact civil unrest we are trying to avoid?
It's not day trading if you hold the asset.
But if a citizen's ability to buy groceries next week depends on whether Uber coin is up 20% or down 40%, because some group of humans decided to short the market, you haven't solved the crisis at all. You've just digitized economic anxiety. When a massive market correction happens, which they always do, entire swaths of the population will lose their purchasing power overnight.
But you're conflating early-stage, highly speculative crypto volatility with deeply integrated, regulated utility tokens that are backed by actual compute. Timmy frames this specifically as a hedge against what he calls token compute.
Token compute.
Yes, let me break that down. In the Fourth Industrial Revolution, processing power, the actual server space, and energy needed to run AI is the new oil. It is the fundamental resource. When you buy AI compute for your micro business, say you spend $100, you might receive $30 worth of 4AR tokens as an incentive. Speculative hype. If you have an asset tied to the consumption of that compute, it acts as an absolute safety net. A government-issued UBI is just a stagnant handout that will constantly lose ground to inflation. A tokenized economy, backed by real compute usage, gives everyday citizens a vested, appreciating interest in the AI revolution. It perfectly aligns the incentives of the megacorporation, the AI agent, and the everyday human being.
Appreciating interest assumes infinite stable growth, and that assumption brings us right back to the core philosophical problem of the source text, the human element.
The hackers.
The hackers. The source asks us to look at history. It asks if the Second World War was inevitable. It asks if the deep polarization of Brexit was necessary. These events actively destroy value. They are irrational. If we tie human survival to corporate utility tokens in a society prone to deep ideological fracturing, what happens when one political group decides to economically attack a rival group's tokens?
Well, the market regulations.
What happens when humans use AGI not to build abundance but to manipulate the token markets of their ideological enemies? The underlying technology might belong to the Fourth Industrial Revolution, but the actors using it are still operating on Iron Age tribalism. By implementing the system, you are essentially handing incredibly sophisticated, automated financial weapons to a species that still hasn't learned how to stop fighting with itself.
We need to pull back and look at the grand trajectory here. My position remains that the frameworks for proposed government capital matched with universal utility tokens offer a visionary and necessary infrastructure.
I hear you.
By leveraging the untiring, purely logical nature of AI to manage the 100-year loans, we can bypass the biases of traditional venture capital and the sluggishness of human government bureaucracy. The threat of a 70% job loss by 2035 is entirely real. The math is already playing out in corporate layoffs today. But the mechanisms to distribute the staggering wealth generated by AGI are mathematically sound and regulatorily viable, as proven by the AMF approval. If we deploy these tools intelligently, we have a highly credible, mechanical path to an equitable Type 1 civilization of abundance.
And my position remains that while the source's diagnosis of the impending 2038 crisis is chillingly accurate, the prescribed solutions require a massive leap of faith I simply cannot make. Distributing massive amounts of state capital and volatile digital tokens to a species characterized by 2,000 years of conflict, prejudice, and hacking is dangerous.
It's definitely a risk.
The financial mechanisms, the 100-year autonomous loans, the compute-backed tokens, they might look incredibly elegant in a white paper, but they fundamentally fail to account for the profound philosophical wound of human nature. You simply cannot automate away the human ego.
I will say, though, despite our deep disagreement on the capacity of humanity to handle this, we do share a vital point of convergence drawn directly from the source material. The traditional models of venture capital and the headcount-based corporate valuations that dictate our current stock markets are fundamentally dead.
Absolutely.
They are completely unequipped to survive the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Completely. On that point, the source is undeniably correct. The old world of wage labor economics is ending right before our eyes. But viewing this transition through that lens of teleological technology suggests there's so much more we need to explore as society. We have to genuinely ask whether humanity can actually mature past its own destructive tendencies before AGI matures into something that makes all of our financial models irrelevant anyway.
Which brings us right back to that crumbling bridge. We know the stress test is coming. We can see the cracks forming in the concrete of our global economy. The ultimate question we are left with is whether AI will serve as the brilliant new structural material that reinforces our society into a civilization of abundance, or if it will simply be the final, unbearable weight that brings the whole human structure crashing down.